All right, so let's jump right into this. We've got a ton of articles about responsible investing in Japan. Seems like everyone's suddenly talking about that.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten a lot more attention.
It's not just hype, though, right? I
Yeah.
mean, one stat that really caught my eye, sustainable investing in Japan has, like, exploded, up 59% in just 2 years.
Yeah, that's not insignificant. It really shows how Japanese investors are changing their thinking. This isn't just a blip. This is more like a fundamental shift towards sustainability.
Okay, so for anyone who's maybe not totally up on all the lingo, what are we actually talking about when we say ESG investing?
Right, good point. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. Those are the factors investors are looking at beyond just, pure profit. So it's about a company's environmental impact, their social responsibility, how well run they are from the top down, that kind of thing.
It's like looking at the whole picture, not just the bottom line.
Exactly. And it's important to note this isn't just some global trend that Japan's following. We're seeing a very specific set of challenges and opportunities playing out over there.
Right, and a lot of the headlines obviously focus on the E part,
Yeah.
like Japan setting that ambitious net zero target. But our deep dive into these articles showed it's way bigger than that.
Absolutely. Yeah, the environmental push is huge, no doubt. But there's this whole other movement happening at the same time, pushing for better corporate governance and asset management reform. It's all connected.
So it's about more than just going green. It's about cleaning up how companies are run in general.
Yeah, you could put it that way.
Now, I can imagine some people hearing corporate governance and their eyes glaze over a bit.
Sure.
But why should our listener, who obviously is interested in all this, why should they care about governance alongside, like, renewable energy and stuff?
Because it comes down to risk. Think about it.
Yeah.
A company with strong governance, they're usually more transparent, more accountable, less likely to get caught up in scandals or, ethical problems.
Makes sense.
So paying attention to the G can be as important as the E for actually protecting your investment.
Right? It's like that old saying, invest in good people, but like scaled up to the corporate world.
Exactly.
And speaking of scale, we got to talk about the big players, right? I'm talking about major institutions like Japan's government pension investment fund, the GPIF. They're making some really interesting moves in this space.
They are, yeah. They're not just testing the waters anymore. GPIF and others like them are going way beyond just analyzing ESG risks. They're actively trying to use their investments to, drive positive change, for example.
So they're putting their money where their mouth is. But what does that actually look like? How do these big institutions actually try to steer a company, towards better environmental practices or whatever their goal is?
Well, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all thing, but one tactic they're using a lot is engagement. Basically, they leverage their position as shareholders to try to push for change from within.
Okay, so like they have a seat at the table.
Right. So they're engaging in dialogue with companies directly, advocating for, say, more sustainable practices, maybe pushing for board diversity, really trying to hold these companies accountable for their ESG commitments.
So it's not just checking boxes on some kind of ESG checklist. It's more about actually getting their hands dirty and trying to make a difference.
Exactly. And it makes a big difference when it's someone like GPIF, with their size and influence.
For sure. But what about the smaller companies out there? We talked about this surge in sustainable investing, but can these smaller firms actually keep up with all this?
That's one of the big challenges, honestly. Imagine you're a smaller company in Japan, right? Suddenly, investors are scrutinizing your ESG performance, there are new regulations to comply with, and you're supposed to be keeping pace with these giants.
Yeah, it's like being called up to the major leagues without the same training or budget as the pros.
Exactly. Resources are stretched thin. It's a lot to handle.
So some companies could easily get left behind in this whole ESG push.
Absolutely. And this is where the lack of a unified approach in Japan really comes into play. Unlike some other markets, there's no single, universally accepted standard for measuring and reporting ESG.
This is kind of the Wild West out there.
Kind of, yeah. And as with any new frontier, you get some less than savory characters trying to take advantage. That's where the whole issue of greenwashing comes in.
Right, we saw that term pop up in our research.
Yeah, greenwashing is basically companies trying to make themselves look way more environmentally friendly than they actually are. It's like putting, a thin coat of eco-friendly paint over some fundamentally unsustainable practices.
Just trying to fool investors.
Right. And even Japan's financial services agency, the FSA, they're worried about it too. They've issued warnings about greenwashing and called for clearer standards, greater transparency.
Which makes sense. But for our listener who's trying to figure all this out, it's like, How do you cut through the noise?
Yeah.
How do you tell which companies are genuinely committed to ESG and which ones are just jumping on the bandwagon?
Due diligence, due diligence, due diligence. That's the key. Don't just take their word for it. You got to look beyond the glossy sustainability reports and really dig into their actual practices. What's their track record on environmental issues? How do they treat their employees? How diverse are their boards? You really have to ask those tough questions.
Trust but verify,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to your money. Now, you mentioned earlier that engagement is one of the ways they're pushing for ESG progress.
Yeah.
Has it always been like that in Japan?
That's an interesting question. Historically, Japan hasn't exactly been known for super strong shareholder engagement. There's definitely a cultural element to it, a preference for consensus and avoiding conflict.
Interesting.
Right. So trying to get Japanese companies to really open up and, engage with investors on these potentially sensitive ESG issues, it hasn't always been easy.
Kind of a clash of cultures almost.
Yeah, you could say that. But our research suggests things might be changing on that front as well.
Oh, really? How so?
What we're seeing now is that asset managers are increasingly being compensated for active engagement on these issues, especially with these smaller companies that are tougher to crack.
Oh, so there's a financial incentive now.
Exactly. They're being incentivized to really push for change.
Okay, so it's a combination of carrots and sticks regulation and incentives to kind of nudge everybody in the right direction. And speaking of incentives, we can't talk about Japan's ESG push without talking about the elephant in the room, right? Their green transformation policy. That's a big deal.
Huge. It's this massive plan to totally transform 22 sectors of the Japanese economy over the next 10 years. We're talking clean energy, major emissions reductions, a completely greener Japan.
And it's not just talk, right? They're putting some serious weight behind this.
Oh, yeah. We're seeing a whole mix of regulations, substantial financial incentives to get companies on board. Now, naturally, this is leading to some growing pains. Companies are scrambling to adapt, figuring out how to meet these new standards, making big investments. But for investors,
it's like a treasure map.
right,
If you can spot those companies that are going to benefit from this huge green wave.
you're in a prime position, yeah. That's why understanding the green transformation policy is so crucial if you're serious about investing in Japan right now. It's not just about understanding ESG, it's understanding the policy landscape that's shaping the playing field.
Okay, so we've got the government setting the stage, investors flexing their muscles, companies trying to adapt. What about the asset managers themselves? How are they evolving in this whole new ESG-focused world?
One of the clearest signs is the number of Japanese firms signing on to the UN's Principles for Responsible Investment, the PRI. We've seen a massive increase in recent years.
And the PRI, just for our listener, that's not just some symbolic thing, right? It's a whole set of guidelines for putting ESG into practice when you're making investment decisions.
Yeah, it's really comprehensive, and it's become the gold standard for responsible investing globally. So this isn't just Japanese firms trying to keep up with a trend. It really shows a change in mindset. They're realizing ESG factors are essential, not just nice to haves.
They're putting their money where their mouth is, basically.
Right. And it goes beyond just signing pledges. We're seeing a real shift in how they're actually doing business.
So how are they weaving ESG into their day-to-day operations?
Well, they're moving away from just screening out the bad companies, the ones involved in fossil fuels or whatever, and instead they're actively looking for companies with strong ESG performance and baking that into their investment decisions.
So it's not just avoiding the bad, it's actively seeking out the good.
Exactly. And it makes sense, especially since there's more and more evidence showing that good ESG performance can actually predict good financial performance down the line.
Yeah, it's not just good ethics, it's good business.
Right. And this ties back to what we were talking about earlier with retail investors. The demand for ESG-focused funds is growing like crazy, and asset managers are responding. There are more and more options out there all the time.
It's like a positive feedback loop. More investor interest, more products, which then pushes more companies to improve their ESG performance.
Exactly. It's what makes this whole space so dynamic and honestly really exciting.
It sounds like Japan's at a real turning point. Despite the challenges, there's this real feeling of momentum, like things are moving in the right direction.
There is. And I think
For our listener who's been following along with all this, the big question is, what does it all actually mean? We've got these regulatory changes, big investors getting involved, even regular investors wanting in on ESG. Is this really a turning point for Japan, or is it like just a temporary thing?
that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's hard to say for sure, but what I find really interesting is that even with all the challenges we've talked about, the resources, the standards, the cultural stuff, there's this real sense of opportunity.
Yeah, it's like everyone's realizing there's a whole different way to think about investing. Not just about the profits, but about the impact, too.
Right, and that opens up a ton of possibilities for investors and for companies that want to do good. We're seeing all these new ESG funds popping up, green bonds, impact investing, you name it, and they're doing really well, often even better than traditional investments.
Which makes you wonder, is this like a bubble? Or is this actually the new normal? Is this how we're going to be judging investments from now on?
It's hard to say, time will tell. But here's the thing, the Japanese government seems really committed to ESG. This isn't just them following a trend, it fits in with their long-term goals too.
So it's not just about like keeping up with the rest of the world,
Right. They want to build a better future for Japan, more resilient, more sustainable.
which is smart.
And that's creating so much space for innovation. Japanese companies are known for being really good at technology and adapting to new things, and now they're using those skills to tackle sustainability. We're seeing some really cool new technologies, renewable energy, waste management, agriculture. It's pretty amazing.
So for investors who are willing to do the work to really understand this new landscape, there's a lot of potential there.
Huge potential. This isn't about getting rich quick. You have to really analyze things, understand the risks and the opportunities. But if you're looking for investments that match your values, that can really make a difference.
Japan might be the place to be.
I think so.
Yeah.
It's a market that's changing fast, lots of potential pitfalls, but also so many possibilities.
And for our listener who got us started on this whole deep dive with their stack of articles, I think the message is clear. Keep asking the hard questions. Keep digging deeper. Don't be afraid to explore this new ESG landscape in Japan. You might just find your next big investment opportunity.
And maybe even help make the world a little bit better along the way.
Now that is something to think about. That's it for today's deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you next time for another one.